All right, let's cross live now to my colleague Andrew Clennell, who's some breaking news for us from the Sydney studios. It's a bit of a bombshell. Andrew, what can you tell us?
Peter, I have here 3 letters from Scott Morrison to Daniel Andrews in July concerning the offer of the provision of the Australian Defence Force troops to the coronavirus lockdown in Victoria. We heard from the hotel quarantine inquiry that there were these 3 letters. Sky News has obtained them under freedom of information laws. So Mr Morrison, he pressured Daniel Andrews by letter in July as the second wave took hold that he needed to get 1,000 Australian Defence Force troops in to assist with the second wave of coronavirus in Melbourne to help with contact tracing and locking down suburbs. On the 4th of July, even before Melbourne went into stage 3 lockdown, Mr Morrison wrote, "I note with concern that the Victorian COVID-19 case numbers have escalated to 108 cases today as part of an increased trend of cases during the past week. This has necessitated a further 2 postcodes being listed as hotspots and new hard lockdowns of 9 residential public housing buildings. The Commonwealth stands ready to provide any support needed on top of the existing measures in place, including ADF support to support planning and logistics, and Commonwealth staff to support clinical efforts, community engagement and contact tracing. As we have seen with the previous outbreaks in northwest Tasmania and Sydney, these types of outbreaks can quickly overwhelm local health systems. I reaffirm the offer of Commonwealth for the on-the-ground support and helping coordinating support from other states while acknowledging Victoria's leadership." And then he says, "I also note that the Commonwealth stands ready to support Victoria through the Australian Defence Force to assist with the lockdown of affected suburbs and to assist to ensure persons from these areas do not travel outside these zones and to other states. It is concerning that there have been a number of cases where such travellers have been identified entering New South Wales in particular. We appreciate this is a national challenge, not just a Victorian one, and as a country we are here to provide support as required." A further letter from the PM to the Premier on July 6, and then on July 11, this even stronger letter, Peter. Mr Morrison wrote, "The remainder of the ADF personnel you requested in your letter of 7th July 2020 remain available to be deployed in Victoria once Victorian officials have finalised their planning and preparation activities. Given the escalating COVID-19 outbreak in Victoria, I recommend that you again consider further ADF deployment to Melbourne over the coming days to assist in the enforcement of public health compliance. It is critical to the containment of the virus that the now thousands of people in isolation and quarantine are carefully tracked by phone and personal visits to ensure compliance and to ensure their welfare. A model successfully used in previous deployments in other jurisdictions involves an ADF member paired with a police officer and a team of 2. This allows the legal enforcement powers to be exercised by state and territory police, supported by ADF members. It will allow a significant expansion of compliance and welfare activity. The VicPol ADF team model could quickly be deployed to expand the ability to support containment rings around metropolitan Melbourne and the Hume Shire. An estimated 1,000 ADF could be progressively deployed in this way over the next week with greater scope beyond. I am also mindful of the positive and reassuring impact that the presence of the ADF can have on communities in times of difficulties, as has already been demonstrated during the COVID-19 situation and during the Black Summer bushfires." Just some context in relation to these letters, Peter. On June 26, the Prime Minister revealed in a press conference that a request for 850 ADF officers made by the Victorians in the wake of the second Victorian outbreak had been rescinded. The Commonwealth submission to the Hotel Quarantine Inquiry tabled this month said that on June 24, the Emergency Management Commissioner in Victoria, Andrew Crisp, sent an email to the federal government asking for the 850, and the next day he sent an email withdrawing the request based on changing operational and resourcing requirements 2 weeks before these letters. So that is when the Prime Minister took a stand, wrote to Daniel Andrews, and as a senior government source put to me when a couple of months ago I FOI'd these documents, the letters were written in a way that Victoria had to accept the ADF assistance.
Well, having been in an office and drafted plenty of letters for a Prime Minister's signature on exactly this same letterhead, let me give you my top-of-mind thoughts. I just had a look at them. Thank you. Someone in Sydney has sent them down to me and put them on my desk. But the mere fact that you've got a letter on the 4th of July from the Prime Minister to the Victorian Premier, followed up with one on the 6th of July and then the 11th of July in that close proximity shows the escalation of concern in Canberra. It's also important to note, Andrew, that these letters are quite clear to document what was offered, so that if and when there would be an inquiry, we all know one was headed that way when we saw those sort of death spikes coming out of the Victorian pandemic numbers, that there would be a paper trail that would hold the Victorian government and the Premier to account. Now, what worries me, I don't think I have missed 1 hour of the press conferences from the Victorian Premier over the last 6 months. How does this evidence, factual evidence, signed, and I know where these letters go, right? When you're in a political office and you get a letter from a Premier to a Prime Minister or a Prime Minister to a Premier, I can tell you it personally gets handed to the leader. I am very intrigued how this marries with statement after statement after statement from Daniel Andrews that there was no offer, or the offer isn't as the Prime Minister said, when it is very clearly, legally, black and white.
Well, there's two issues here. One, of course, is the April issue around the ADF offer for hotel quarantine. We've seen the correspondence in the inquiry from the top bureaucrat federally, Phil Gaetjens, to the top bureaucrat in Victoria, Chris Eccles, who says he doesn't know what he did about that. This is a separate issue. But what is intriguing is, in July, but what is intriguing is that Victoria first asked for the 850, then didn't. Then as the numbers escalated, you can see the concern here from the Prime Minister. He is worrying, he's quite clearly worried from these words that things are getting out of hand, and he has to do all that he can. I should point out, it's immersed in that inquiry. Daniel Andrews responded to every one of these letters. So when you talk about the 3 letters in a week, there's a response, but I take your point in the sense that they could easily pick up the phone to each other or message each other. It's got to this point, as Victoria goes into lockdown, real concern from the PM that the Premier wasn't moving fast enough to take on that ADF support, and that is obvious in these letters, Peter.
And look, just let me add there too, there may well have been phone calls on days where they were followed up with letters, where there might have been a push from the PM trying to avoid putting it in writing, saying, look, mate, you've really got to take these extra resources. This is starting to get out of control. If there was pushback from the Premier, we don't know this, but let me say there is, you then follow it up with a letter to make it categorically clear down the track that you did everything you could when you're the Prime Minister to get assistance to Victorians on the ground. I think these are extraordinary. And if it was anyone other than Daniel Andrews, I would say that the Premier must resign. Honestly, the Premier must resign. But the guy is Houdini, at least for the moment. We'll see what happens when he fronts his own inquiry on Friday. Andrew Clennell, well done. Thank you for this tonight.
Thanks, Peter.